Woodbury Public Library. I'm Sandy Carlson, Woodbury's Poet Laureate, and I'm glad we're here on this rainy, late afternoon in May to celebrate loyalty, sacrifice, and honor through poetry. And I'll get the ball rolling with some poetry that I wrote about this man. This is Lawrence Isbell. He was actually born in Woodbury, September 26, 1923. And I grew up with that picture, a smaller version of it, on my grandmother's end table down in Darien. And I knew him as the boy who didn't come home. He joined the armed forces after Pearl Harbor was bombed. He was a little too young to go, so his mother had to sign off. And he was on his last tour, and he didn't plan to sign up again. And the Japanese torpedoed his submarine, and he never came home. And I grew up with the story of Uncle Lawrence, and it stayed with me for years. And when I was an adult, I had a great uncle, his older brother, Alan Isbell. We called him Uncle Bud. And Uncle Bud had a room in his house he called the Inner Sanctum, and it was where he did his research on the submarine service, and particularly trying to find servicemen who knew my Uncle Lawrence. And he wrote letters, went to commemorative events all over the country to see if he could find men who knew his brother, trying to put the story back together. And he created this commemorative booklet in the early days of the photocopier. And it's dedicated to the memory of our beloved brother, Lawrence Harvey Isbell, September 26, 1923 to June 1, 1944. Compiled by Alan J. H. Isbell Sr., 1989. And it was a lifetime of work and copies of handwritten letters. And I was deeply inspired by this, and when this uncle had a second stroke and was in a nursing home, I would visit him regularly. We both lived in Danbury. And I would go over there with my baby girl and try to communicate with him, but he lost the ability to speak. And he would point and bang the table, or if he saw something in the New York Times that was a clue that I could connect with, I would spend hours, and he would never let go of a thread. So if I had to leave, next time I came back, we picked up where we left off. And he wanted me to know these stories of the family, and it meant so much to him. And there were some crazy stories with those conversations and the goings-on in nursing homes. Save that for another day. I learned a lot from my uncle, and I'm richly blessed that my great-grandmother and great-grandfather had 6 children, and that I got to know 5 of the 6. And as my great-uncle was struggling following the stroke, I decided to put the pieces together in my own collection called Silent Spaces for my uncle, to show him that I heard what he was telling me, and that I could love my missing uncle too. So I'm just going to read a few selections from this collection. This poem is called This Is Our Family. Birdseed hulls fall onto the orange lily petals that bloom today. My uncle pounds the table to beckon memory. Age is a thief. He wills me to do the remembering for him. I turn away. The lilies cover the slope outside. The feeder sails the orange tide. Many birds dance above the sea. I would slip below to claim the past, my uncle's. I recall his stories. I give him back. He rests, then points. He has news. I will gather his gestures like flowers, a great bouquet of his life. He will make a social bird of me on this island. What is it? His nurse had her 21st birthday. He was there. Every day I gather his dreams like twigs and dry leaves into a nest. And you know, the thing about visiting my uncle is he was very involved with the life of the nursing home. He was a morning guy. He had his collared shirt on with the one arm that worked. He wheeled himself down to get the New York Times before people messed it up. He'd lay it out on his bed and he'd read, and he'd cut out the Hirschfeld cartoons so that we could count the Ninas together, and he'd save me news stories. and he was very alive up here. And because of that, the nurses and the CNAs, they loved him. And sometimes I'd be going down the family path, and he was going down what just happened here at Hancock Hall path, so there was one story, I'll tell you later, it took me a year to figure out. It had to do with a tattoo on one of the CNAs. This is called Jared's Diary. I mentioned that my great uncle Lawrence was born here. My mother's family were among the first people in Woodbury. They left the Killingworth area and migrated towards Stratford up the river and hooked a left and found themselves here in Woodbury. My great uncle Bud, when he was a kid, he was playing in the Thomas's barn and he found these small diaries. And lo and behold, they were his great-grandfather, Jared Isbell's diary. And Jared was a tobacco farmer here in town in the area where the ski slope used to be. And my uncle found these as a child, and when he was a retired man, he and my Aunt Ruth had their manual typewriters and sat by the window and typed in natural light because it was the only way to read the faint pencil on the pages. And so Jared's diary gave us some insight into 19th century life here in town. This is called Jared's Diary. In the rut carved by the wagging wheel of memory, ice absorbs daylight as falling sawdust keeps the light in cold, binding them to the slumped graves of Jared and Polly. They used to smile at me from behind the lines of weathered skin and sore teeth within an ebony frame left in the Isbell attic, to watch over the forgotten treasure of every person who ever had lived in the family home and the visiting grandchildren who could not let old things rest. There are no headstones at the graveyard. They lack the ready cash upon death for a stone to assure us that Jared and Polly lie there at their rest. Money goes on diaries, ink, wallpaper, tobacco, gaiters. The work that purchases these things leaves no time for thoughts of monumental stones. Memory will not admit the loss, though it lets fall from the wagon grass and leaves crunching under your feet. Moon that looks red tonight and a little smoky. Borrowed plows, sausage grinders, meat cutters, sweet corn, potatoes, beans, and squash. A half dime on the road at the south end of the pond. Albert heard here a whitewashing, and the new rooms painted. The beetle and wedge I need to split the rails. Even in the rain, mowed the granny lot and rolled it down the hill, and mowed part of the barn meadow and heaped it up. The wheel rolls to a flyleaf inscription, better read in natural light. 1871, property of Jared S. Isbell, Woodbury, Litchfield County, Connecticut. I live in the northwest corner of town, on the Washington Road. And there was a picture that made its way. My mother's ancestors left Woodbury for Stamford after the Civil War when farming kind of dried up and became carpenters and plumbers, and my mother liked to say that they ate steak during the Depression, that they did the things that they had to do and they survived quite well. And there was this portrait that their son, Jared and Polly's son, took with a camera he made. And it was one of those Victorian portraits in those big scary frames. And I would go up my grandmother's walk-up attic with the finished floor, and there they were. It was haunting. This poem is called Family Tree. Canada geese blend into the stalks of brown corn. A lean woodpecker's bobbing head stutters time into a frozen tree. Swirling snow clings to evergreen branches, raised like arms in prayer. My great-grandfather's grandfather called such snowfall a squall in the diary he kept faithfully. He, a tobacco farmer, had to know the weather. His wife saved egg money for wallpaper and the like. The bottom of her willow egg basket is gone, but we keep it. His son trapped beaver. They harvested apples for a neighbor in exchange for use of her barn to dry the tobacco. She too was family somehow. Squaw. Tumbleweeds bright with snow in the wasting meadow tumble past the geese to sleep face down in the mud. Just going to read two more. This poem is called Silent Service. When I was working on this collection and looking at the letters and the pieces that shaped my great Uncle Lawrence's sense of who he was and the drive to serve his nation in the very new submarine service, I realized that everything he experienced, everybody he knew, you probably saw that portrait in the attic too, became who he was and was part of what impelled him to serve this country. So, silent service. A third and more the nation's age, my uncle does not listen for news. He once told me in the story of a brother that there is no news. The herring sank when the Japanese on land nailed the U-boat's conning tower. Only oil bubbled to the top of the silent, sealed water. There is no news, no story. That boy's ballad position was in that tower. He wanted to be a submariner, became one, and that's it. Near the coast of Japan, a kid who liked to fish died without a story. A brother tried all his life to find it in other submariners' artifacts, pictures, history books. None my uncle met knew this ship's cook, third class, 60 years ago. Too young to be there, he nevertheless was. Perhaps he survived? He loved a girl. Who's to say how hard it is surviving? A stroke of very bad luck left my uncle his fist to do his talking. His locked mouth keeps stories prisoner. There are none to hear. He keeps them all. There is no news. Love alone remains. One last poem when we try to remember. These bits remain, letters, reports, chapters, legends in stone, a fine man and brave, so brave. All we do pales in contrast. Consider all that he gave. They were all brave men. Brave, I knew such men. Brave, though I did not know your dear brother. So young, a fine man and brave. Fine and brave. Thank you. Thank you. Next up, we'll have Pat Martola, creative writing professor and president of the Connecticut Poetry Society and author of several collections of fine poetry. Thank you for joining us today, Pat.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you so much for inviting me here tonight. And thank you all for coming on this rainy day. Every day is a good day for poetry, right? So I took to heart the themes for today, loyalty, honor, and sacrifice. And I would like to start with a poem to fit the loyalty theme. And it's about a couple in their 90s. And I actually went weekly to their home to do art therapy with the woman. And we became quite fond of each other. They loved to garden, and her husband, Walter, would always show me their garden with great pride. So here's the title of the poem is The Old Couple, and it's for Walter and Emmy. He woos his garden tenderly, feels the winter closing in, never speaks of weeds that clutter her mind. The years were good, and as she smiles, he plants a kiss upon her lips. No, she will not bloom again. The sun sinks lower in the sky. The soil, depleted now, does not sustain the crop. Today, she forgot her name. They laugh to hide the winter's chill. Bow to nature, withered flowers waiting for the frost. And I read you this poem toward the theme of honor, and it is about my dad. He was a World War II veteran who had PTSD, and as we all know, at that time, PTSD was no thing. They just sent the soldiers home. And this one is titled Unspoken. By the bedside, by myself, almost alone, still he lingers, me keeping company, death watch for a soldier, my father. An only child again today, my siblings stay away. His breath comes hard, conversation but a subtle glance, with one eye shut. The silence feels the same. We seldom spoke before. The war we lived is over, and suddenly the deafening quiet roars, the echo large and loud. The hands that struck with vengeance, now reduced to bone and blue-gray flesh, lay clasped upon his chest, as if in silent prayer. Forgive me, daughter, I have sinned. One final gasp, I grasp a word and feel his hand, a gentle touch, a tourist from a foreign land, untraveled here. With wounds of battle, AWOL for today, I watch him watch me. Get some rest, I say. Again, this poem shows my father's sacrifice. He was in the United States Army in the Rainbow Division, which was a very special division. It's called My Father's War. He brought back guns and bayonets, souvenired from German soldiers killed in battle. A Nazi flag, its swastika shouting the shame of humankind. These he would save in cardboard boxes, stored away, keeping company with badges of bravery and honor. History books would say the war was past, 1945 when he came home, a hero's welcome. The piece of him he left behind would never surface, trapped like prisoners who could not escape the stench of Auschwitz that still hangs heavy in German air. His innocence burned alongside ghosts whose cries would haunt him, hollow sounds of horrors he could never speak. At home, the local papers sought accounts of what the soldiers saw, where they'd been. He would describe in great detail the beauty of the countryside. In winter, how brutally the winters turn the soft and gentle snow to ice. Quite fond of Vietnam veterans. I really appreciate their sacrifice in particular. As we know, when they came home, they were not greeted very kindly. And they were drafted so young, they had no idea what lay ahead of them after they were drafted. This is titled Drafted, 1969. No application needed, no SATs, no letters of recommendation. He's been accepted. He makes his way, street smart, onto Vietnamese soil, unafraid of what he doesn't know. Jungle warfare, friendly enemies, the solace in the beds of Saigon whores. He learns the language of the doomed and turns to trickster to survive. Damned in Vietnam, he wears the guise of clown, breaks the tension for his fellow soldiers and himself. It proclaims he has the measles, denies the spray of blood that used to be his buddy as bullets whip and whiz. On Mother's Day, he brings his female sergeant a bouquet of bottle rockets wrapped in flak jacket. At night, he sleepwalks, dreams he's not the killing kind. By day, he laughs the laugh of one possessed, struts like a chicken with Tourette's. He keeps their spirits high as the easy weed they smoke. Quietly, they rise above reality, drift a while on the way to heaven. Honoring the sacrifice of another Vietnam vet. This is titled Letter to Private Bates. Turn off your expectations. Use the remote if you must. Turn off your identity. You are not the same person who left. Turn off the images of your buddy's body intact. You wear his blood on your face, splattered like a rash. It itches. You scratch with pills and booze, the only friends you trust to turn off your pain. Turn off the battlefield, the hush of the dead. Their silence reminds you to never sleep with your eyes closed. Turn off the war inside your head. You want to turn off reality. You were only 18, reaching for that last inch of life. It was too hard to turn off the killing switch. This is about my mom. We all know how much mothers sacrifice for their children and their families. And sometimes we don't appreciate that until we get a little bit older. This is titled Most Times. It wasn't like that. I watched those old home movies, see my mother shot through an 8mm lens. She smiles like mother of pearl, kissing my uncles and aunts on the holidays. Kissing, always kissing, and shining like moon glow. She's dressed like a star in those 50s clothes, on her way to becoming vintage. I see her in slow motion, wonder what might have happened had she caught up to Gloria Steinem or Betty Friedan. Instead, she had babies, cooked meals, folded laundry, then worked in the factory. I don't remember her kissing me. It wasn't like that. Some nights I turn off the lights, rewind the reel on that big metal wheel and see her delicate light filtering through like dust in the heat and haze of an old Kodak projector that never showed the way it really was. I meant to bring this book up here to show you, but I did not. It's on the table. This one also talks about sacrifice, a different kind of sacrifice. Again, of women. This time I speak for one of the Afghan women that I mentored, and most recently, she and her sister experienced life under the Taliban, but recently they published a book of poems in English about their experiences. They had to sacrifice, they had to leave their home in order to stay alive, and they are now safe somewhere in Turkey. And this is her poem. It is, her name is Shafika, and it's called Displaced. If you are a displaced person, then you have a sad story. If you left your roots somewhere behind, then you have wrinkles in your heart. If you still have images of places you can never see again, then you left an eye behind. If you walked miles and are unable to return, then you buried hopes deep inside. If your heart deflates during evenings, then you lost a sense of belonging. If you speak your language only in your dreams, then you grow a great pain of missing inside. If your eyes sink deeply, then you miss familiar faces. If your brain tries to escape a past, then you have already lost a fight. Thank you so much.
I forgot to mention that Pat is also a poet laureate of Cheshire. So, thank you very much, Pat. Next up, we have Jack Sheedy, memoirist and poet extraordinaire.
Thank you, Sandy, and welcome everyone. I'm going start with a little off-topic poem, just because I want to change the mood a little bit, have something fun, and something different, a little lighthearted. I wrote this yesterday. Everyone's heard of John Keats, right? Anybody not heard of John Keats? Okay. He wrote a poem called On First Looking into Chapman's Homer. You may be familiar with that title. When I first opened a book of John Keats' poems and saw that title, I said, oh, great, how did he know about baseball? So, I read the poem and I said, okay, it's about this blind, dead Greek guy who wrote the Odyssey, the Iliad, and some guy named Chapman who translated it. Well, I think the title does not promise what it delivers, or does not deliver what it promises. So I wrote a poem by the same title, and here goes. On first looking into Chapman's Homer. Bottom of the eighth in Cincinnati. Cal Chapman's batting from the left-hand box. Kyler's on second on a hit and an error. Just one man out. The score is tied at 4. On April 22nd, 36. Roy Parmalee, right-hander for St. Louis, hurls a hanger and Chapman doesn't miss. It's over Skopic's head in deep right field. Kyler scores easy. Chapman's rounding first. The ball is bobbled, found, then dropped again. Chapman never stops. He's now at third, while 1,300 fans are going wild, screaming, all the way, Cal, all the way. The rookie for the Reds is in a sprint. The ball's still out there somewhere in tall grass when Calvin Chapman, 25 years old, it is inches from the plate, and he slows down, stops in his tracks and grins, puts hands on hips. He jogs in place, says, tag me if you can. He mugs, he shrugs, extends a cleated foot, ever so slowly, oh so delicate. He taps the plate, then pounces with both feet. Inside the park, he shouts and doffs his cap. Inside the park, and who knows where it's at. In Calvin Chapman's brief baseball career, his batting average was .265. He crossed the plate just 24 more times. But this was Chapman's homer, his only one. That was just for fun. Thanks. This one was, it's probably more on topic, a little bit more on topic. This was written shortly after my brother Tom passed away a little over a year ago now. It reminded me, my brother Tom reminded me of something that we both witnessed and no one else witnessed during the flood of '55. And it's a sort of a story of courage, but courage between two inanimate objects separated by a utility wire. And it's called The Current. I've told the story of the flood 100 times or more. The musky smell, the floating logs, the current's ceaseless roar. But Tom and I, and no one else, were witnesses to this, a fight between a light pole and a barn in the rainy mist. They say the river swelled its banks some 30 feet that day. The river and the rain, the clouds, the fog, they all were gray. My dad and I, 2 brothers and 2 sisters, climbed the stairs, the water lapping at our heels despite our desperate prayers. The current pulled the barn away from our house with a piercing scream, like a sleeper who was waking from a horrifying dream. The hulking barn listed left and right near a railroad crossing sign, but it resisted the current's pull, caught in the power line. My 6-year-old brother's eyes grew wide, but he never said a word, just watched the line stretch tighter while the old barn barely stirred. The rugged light pole held the wire, and we watched a tug of war. The line will snap, I said, and Tom just nodded, nothing more. From our vantage by a window, we watched the water rise, the current growing stronger, rain pouring from the skies. My brother never looked at me. His eyes were fixed on the scene, a light pole and a rocking barn, and a wire in between. Then all at once it ended, but not how we thought it would. The light pole broke in half with a bang, the top spilling into the flood. A bright blue flame shot up and died. We watched the wire sink. The barn broke free, then broke apart and scattered in the drink. For 66 more years, my brother struggled and grew old. Sometimes he was the restless barn, sometimes the sturdy pole. Sometimes he was the wire, a thin and fragile tether. He must have known that none of them could hold it all together. The wire lost in that tug of war, dying in a blazing flash. The light pole lost, it's plain to see, and the barn fell apart in a splash. What all this means, it's hard to say, but maybe Tom understood. Nobody wins when you fight the current. Nobody ever could. Tom was a scrappy fighter, and he fought his battles alone. He won a few and lost a few, but mainly held his own. Like the light pole and the wire in the barn so long ago, he battled the current all his life. At the end, he went with the flow. Thank you. Do you want to do the other one? Want to do the finale?
Sure.
Sandra's going to help me read my wife's poem, actually. My wife couldn't be here today, and so she asked me to read her poem, which is a fairly long piece. I think I timed it in about 7 minutes, maybe a bit more. And we're going to take turns reading. I believe you're going to start, and I'll read the parts that are indented, and we'll read together the red stuff.
Okay.
The red.
So I read the left justify, you read the end.
And this, I have to tell you, is sort of a found poem in a way, because my wife actually composed this for a Veterans Day event. And she said, what am I going to write? You know, so she found a bunch of letters written by soldiers from the field that were, sent home to family members, loved ones. And she just took bits and pieces from each one. And it goes from like the revolutionary times down to the present day. And so it's called Blood and Ink, Soldiers' Letters Home from War.
Dear folks, Mommy and Dad, Pa, dearest mother, beloved wife, sweetheart mine, my precious, I am still in the land of the living. All the gang are writing post-mortem letters and kind of half ashamed of themselves for doing it.
It is a strange feeling to me, but a very real one, that every letter I write home to you may be the last that I shall write or you read.
I don't know why I am writing this. I really hope that this letter never gets to you, because if it does, that means I'm dead.
I write, for you will be sure to hear that I was killed in the fight last Sunday. For it was reported that I was, but I write this with my own hand to testify that I am yet in the land of the living.
It is pretty hard to check out this way without a fighting chance, but we can't live forever. I'm not afraid to die. I just hate the thought of not seeing you again.
I do not want you to think I am depressed. Indeed, on the contrary, I am very cheerful. But out here in odd moments, the realization comes to me of how close death is to us. It seems like a dream more than anything else.
They have been teaching us bayonet fighting. It makes your arms ache when you lunge at an imaginary enemy. The rifle at arm's length with this hard training. They will either make a man of me or kill me. You ought to see me in my shrapnel helmet and gas mask. It would make you laugh.
Here I am, 20 years old now. I'm a man now, not a teenager anymore.
I recently saw some of the dead boys they had taken off the battlefield. If some of the men back home, whom a personal ambition attempt to prolong the war, could see them, I'm sure the war would end soon.
When you look at them, You can't help but think, why are they dead? I hope these men have not given their lives for empty words.
You know how they say war is not like the movies show it? Well, they're wrong. It's exactly like the movies.
Such a storm of balls I never conceived possible for men to live through. Shot and shell, shrieking and crashing, canister and bullets, whistling, hissing, most fiend-like through the air, until you could almost see them.
Oh Lord, if ever a fellow was afraid, absolutely frightened to death, it was this child.
A rattle of musketry, at first like pattering drops upon a roof, then a roll, crash, roar, and rush like a mighty ocean billow upon the shore, chafing the pebbles, wave on wave, with deep and heavy explosions like the crashing of the thunderbolts. How close death is to us. Soldiers love a general that loves and tries not to lose them.
I shall never forget that battle. My company suffered most. There are only 4 of us left out of 100. I consider myself lucky getting off with wounds.
Today is probably the worst day I have ever lived in my entire short life. My best friend in this shithole was killed. He was only 22 years old. I feel that if I was only half a second sooner in pulling the trigger, he would still be alive. Strange how short a time half a second is, the difference between life and death.
All the bodies had disappeared into the water. There was nothing left but blood and an empty raft. Swarms of sharks were everywhere. The sharks ate well today. Later, darkness descended and the rains came.
The third shell struck and killed my horse, bursting, blew him to pieces, knocked me down, and tore off my right arm.
One may get used to rifle bullets, and does, but you can never get used to the shells. They make such an awful noise.
The truth is, when bullets are whacking against tree trunks, and solid shot are cracking skulls like eggshells, the consuming passion in the breast of the average man is to get out of the way.
In less than 1 minute, a relatively peaceful day went straight to hell. After you've been here only as short a time as I have, your ideas change.
If there is a place called hell, this surely must be it. We must be the devil's disciples doing all his dirty work. I keep asking myself. I'm sorry, your turn.
I keep asking myself if there is a God, and how the hell come young men with so much to live for have to die?
Perhaps you would like to know the spirit of the men out here now. The truth is, every man is fed up, almost past bearing. Not a single one has an ounce of what we call patriotism left in him.
All that every man desires now is to get done with it and go home. The greatest hope of a great majority is that rioting and revolt at home will force the government to pack in on any terms.
No big thing, but I finally got to take a shower after a week. Boy, did I stink. The dirt must have been a quarter-inch thick.
I need a fountain pen. I need a wristwatch of the shockproof variety. Both my fountain pen and wristwatch are broken. I also need a sleeveless woolen khaki-colored sweater.
I received your parcel. The pineapple was delicious. The banana was crushed, but I ate it just the same.
Yesterday was Thanksgiving. Most of the doughboys had turkey. It's amazing when you think of all of us so far from home, observing still in the midst of a battlefield. Thanksgiving.
I think that we shall see a fight soon. I know not where I shall be when I write next. We have 2 secession spies here in camp, and a nigger that knows where there is a lot of guns, wagons, mules, and other things. He says that he will tell me where they are if I go with him and take some men with me.
I have flown 1,500 hours now, and in those hours I can tell you a lifetime story. Today I am 21, far away but coming home older. I dream of her hand touching mine, telling me to come home, but I wake up and it's some sergeant telling me I have to fly.
He got his death wound when fighting desperately side by side with me in the wildest hand grenade and machine gun fight man could live or die in. I am said to have absolutely no nerves. I saw over 100 of our men blown to fragments by a big shell about 200 yards from where I was lying. It's turned midnight now, and I think I will sleep now.
If we never meet on this earth, I hope we will meet in heaven, where partings will be no more.
When this reaches you, for me, there will be no more war, only eternal peace and waiting for you.
Au revoir, my own sweetheart. God will keep you safe till the storm's over. I really did love you with all I had. You were everything to me.
I won't live till morning, so goodbye, my friends. May God be with you all. Goodbye. God bless my poor soul.
It seems like a dream more than anything else.
Thank you.
Oh. Thanks, Jack, and thanks Patricia Martin, Connecticut's Beat Poet Laureate, for sharing that poem with us. So Jack, it's an honor to read it with you, Jack. Thank you. All right, we've got some guests who might want to read tonight. Would anybody like to step up? Okay, go ahead, Scott.
Good evening. This is a poem that I wrote for tonight on the topic for the month. And the setting is a wilderness courthouse set in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan when I was a young lawyer starting out. And there was a judge there who I had experience with, and I took things that I learned from him with me on my journey as a professional. Different courts, different places, high, low, but this judge always stayed with me. And I knew him both in the courtroom and to some degree professional events, and had the opportunity to speak with him, so I had some insight into his own experience that made him the judge that he was. And this poem is about one of my experiences in the courtroom with that judge, which was evoked by tonight's topic. The title is The Quarter. All rise. Old Black Robe is announced in a Michigan Upper Peninsula courtroom. Sit down, grumps Black Robe. Prosecutor alleges public drunkenness in the name of the people, but eager to please a small but vocal group of religious voters. How do you plead? Asks Black Robe in monotone. Guilty, croaks the crooked, disheveled, stringy-haired defendant. Pausing, Black Robe then asks matter-of-factly, "Are you a veteran?" A question he asks most every defendant, but written nowhere. In the back of Black Robe's consciousness is himself, a young, short, country army soldier, son of Finnish immigrants, pushing ahead, under fire of blazing Nazi guns on the Normandy beach of France. A long ago place and time he learned a life lesson to push to resolve differences. barely answers defendant. Embarrassed, perplexed, and confused at the rarely heard question, not knowing what to expect. 10 days jail, sentence suspended, $20 fine, murmurs Blackrobe, slamming his gavel down. Surprised and thankful for no jail time, defendant quickly digs into his left jeans pocket. He counts out $19.75 on the wooden table before him. He tells Blackrobe with rising anxiety, "I'm a quarter short." "To jail," yells the prosecutor. Defendant writhes. Blackrobe frowns, narrows his eyes, and thinks. To gasps, Blackrobe slowly leans to the left in his squeaky chair, hikes up his robe, and reaches into his trouser pocket for a quarter. The young court-appointed defense attorney standing next to defendant sees and quickly reaches into his own wool suit pocket first, pulls out a quarter, brandishes it high as if it were a torch, and proudly announces, "Judge, we have the fine in full." Blackrobe slowly puts his change back into his pocket and nods in silent satisfaction. "Next."
All right, next up we have Ed, who has found something on his home.
I feel sorry for the people who aren't here.
Me too.
Really?
So what was interesting about the poem that Sandy and Jack read together is that the weapons change, the words change to match the times, but the sentiments are the same. And I say that relating to a book by James McPherson that Sandy had picked up from me when we were in Gettysburg. And McPherson wrote a lot of Civil War stuff, and so in all his research, he had diary quote after diary quote after diary quote. And this book was built chapter by chapter on certain subjects, but it was all the voices of the soldiers. And a lot of the sentiments were the same. And it's also funny how some words stay with you. The quote about being in hell, after the Battle of Fredericksburg, when Union morale was pretty low, Abraham Lincoln said, "If there's a place such as hell, then surely I am in it." And that was right before the big turnaround and stuff. The poem I'm going to read, though, is calls to mind the honor and sacrifice of the war on civil rights, or the war for civil rights. It's called "So We Don't Forget, So We Can Improve." Cultures throughout history have regarded stones as precious objects. Granite is believed to help your health, energy, and overall situation. It is associated with strength and can be worn as a talisman. Approach the circular table, look closely at the stillness, at what the water barely rippling in the gentle Montgomery breeze allows you to read in the etchings, revealing viciousness in our battle, ever ongoing, against hatred and racism. His name is there, that of the dark villain, that of the innocent teenager abducted, tortured, lynched in Mississippi for speaking to a white woman. 28 Aug, 1955, Emmett Lewis Till. Their names are there, those of young girls in church, those dressed in their Sunday best, seemingly safe in Birmingham until a bomb exploded and innocents died. 15 Sept, 1963, Addie Mae Collins, Denise McNair, Cynthia Wesley, Carol Robertson. His name is there, that of another innocent boy, that of a 13-year-old, shot in Birmingham amid the terror, amid the shock of the bomb blast. 15 Sept, 1963, Virgil Lamar Ware. Their names are there, those of men and women, those black and white, ordinary, courageous people fighting in Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana for equality. Around the circle, 1950s and 60s, Medgar Wiley Evers, James Joseph Reeb, Viola Farvai Louisi, Martin Luther King, and so many other martyrs, 74 more left out, not included in the Granite Circle. Their documentation weak, though their belief strong, that they also suffered dearly for the movement. Step back now, catch your breath. Take in 40 feet of black granite wall backing the table, echoing Amos, echoing King, until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Feel the power of the stone. Feel what they felt, striving for civil rights. Feel their hope. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. Our next open mic will be on June 12th, and the theme is Independence, Equality, and Juneteenth will be a week ahead of Juneteenth, but that'll be the theme. And we've got an incredible lineup of presenters, and it'll be a variety of media too. We've got poetry, prose, letters, so it should be a nice event. If you can come out, that would be great. And thank you for joining us.